The plan to develop 23 empty acres in North County has been nothing but trouble. But a compromise to scale back the project known as One Paseo appears to have ended the wrangling. The mayor's task force announced its plan to replace decrepit Qualcomm Stadium and keep the Chargers here. How much will it all cost? And will the team stay or will they bolt to L.A.? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks of KPBS News. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Mark.
And Scott Lewis, CEO of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back. And business reporter Lori Weisberg of the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Lori.
Hello.
Well, it's all over, especially the shouting. Kilroy, the developer of the controversial One Paseo project in Carmel Valley, agreed yesterday to downsize it rather than face a referendum. The result looks like a development that opponents can live with. The No Paseo forces, if you will, objected mainly to increased traffic. Here's what Ken Ferinsky of What Price Main Street had to say.
The main objection to this site is traffic. You know, they're generating 23,000 trips a day, which requires them to widen streets, to divert traffic through neighborhoods by schools, elementary schools. Kids will have to get to the elementary school, they'll have to walk across 9 lanes of traffic.
All right, Megan, tell us about the scope of the original plan here. This was a pretty big project.
Yeah, it's about 23 acres, and I think it was over 1 million square footage in terms of development. There would be about 600 residential spaces, office space, a ton of retail, all kind of situated around this Main Street concept.
And this particular project was being viewed around San Diego because it was seen as whatever happened here might be some sort of model in this whole smart growth philosophy, right?
Yeah, I think it was sort of playing into the city of mini villages. So it was almost taking this town center, this village, and plopping it into basically a suburb. And so it would increase density in that area and be kind of a model for smart growth. But a lot of people argued that it wasn't exactly smart growth because, you know, how would you get to that village? There wasn't any public transit or anything like that.
So smart growth is supposed to be more dense residences and commercial in an area that has service from transit, mass transit.
Right. It's recognizing that we're running out of space. There's more people that we need to house, and we need to kind of limit their trips. If they can walk to work, then there's less cars on the road, and so that's better for carbon emissions.
Okay. Now, who opposed the big original plan and why?
So there were a few community groups, What Price Main Street, the East Bluff Community Association, and the Alliance for Responsible Development. These were all kind of groups interested in development, and then also residents. And then they kind of aligned with the shopping center directly across the street, which of course was opposed to this new retail.
Because they're a competitor.
Right, and it's, you know, directly across the street.
Now, go ahead, Laura.
I was going to say, you know, what I found interesting on the developer angle of the owner of the shopping center across the street is that he filed a lawsuit saying, you know, it just wasn't environmentally responsible. It really didn't mitigate for the environmental hazards, and yet it was really, that was code for, I don't really want any more expansion, any more competition, and he's planning an expansion himself, I think, in his center.
Yeah, it was always about the traffic. That's what was publicly discussed, but you have to also look at the competition side of it. And
yeah, so a lot of moving parts, Scott.
Yeah, you know, I think this isn't done yet. They have to come back with a new design with new levels of development. And there's really no indication there's going to be fewer homes necessarily. They might get rid of all the retail or a bunch of it or some other combination of things that just lower the traffic total. But then it has to go all the way back through this process again and get approved. And so we got to compromise in the sense that the lawsuits and the vote and referendum that we're going forward, that's done. But this could still flare up again.
Now, and you touched on that vote. The council had approved the earlier plan, right? This gets a little complicated and processy,
right.
But they had to vote on it again yesterday.
Yeah,
Explain it.
the city council approved the project in February, and that's despite a lot of a lot of opposition from residents. That area's planning group opposed it. The city council went ahead and approved it, but these community groups gathered enough signatures to force the city council to reconsider. So this vote, the vote this week was whether to rescind that approval or let it go all the way to the ballot and let voters decide. And they ultimately decided to rescind.
Yeah, because they had this last minute, this compromise, because there were lawsuits involved too, as we said at the open.
Right.
So a big sigh of relief on yesterday's vote here, and this didn't yet set the precedent and all, and it plays into other areas in recent political history.
It was interesting being at the meeting. I mean, this has been really contentious for a long time, I think 6 years, and so yesterday's meeting was pretty lighthearted comparatively. People were cracking jokes, but then there was kind of this period of mourning after the vote where Councilman Gloria, Councilman Alvarez, and some folks in the audience kind of said, you know, this is the way that the Barrio Logan community plan should have gone. There was a lot of disagreement between business, between residents with the Barrio Logan community plan. Similar thing happened. A referendum was passed. City Council had to reconsider, and City Council went the opposite way with Barrio Logan. So there really was a sense of sadness. They said, you know, we kind of missed the boat with that one, and that's unfortunate.
Well, are we seeing this again, where some folks who have the money to put together a petition drive and can just, again, kind of overrule what the city council, the people's representatives, have decided on an issue?
Yeah, it's become clear that gathering signatures has become another column of local government. That, the city council can do what it wants, voters can elect the representatives that they want, and there's a judicial process. But if it can't get through that hurdle, if there's enough money on the side of forcing it to a ballot, that carries with it tremendous weight. And in this case, that money came from that competing shopping center, and they were able to force a much different project.
And on the other hand, it seems like they were able to forge a compromise, but they were unable to do so in Barrio Logan. And I know that the head of all the community planning groups, Joe LaCava, was saying that the problem started in the beginning when the council ignored the planning groups. So there's still that element at how much of a say do the planning groups have in these projects?
Yeah, there was sort of this little stem on this story where I think 17 community planning groups passed resolutions saying you shouldn't have passed One Paseo, but also saying, you know, you shouldn't pass One Paseo because that's showing that you're willing to go over the planning community, the planning board's heads, and not listen to the residents.
And we should note that communities have these groups. These folks get together. They volunteer, spend a lot of time. They come up with these community plans. They're not binding, but they're supposed to have a certain weight when it gets to the planning commission and the city council.
The community plan is binding. You have to get city council approval to go around it. The community planning boards have nothing but just recommendation power.
No real power.
But in this case, they had political sway as well. And so, that's all three candidates who are running for that city council seat next year, which is going to be probably the most expensive and ferocious city council race we've seen probably ever. And that is, all three of them were against this project. And so that shows the kind of politics that were around it.
The names of those folks who are
it'd be Barbara Bree and Joe LaCava on the Democratic side, and then Ray Ellis on the Republican side.
Okay,
so,
and who's run before, and Sherry Leitner is end of her term.
Yeah, so who wins that race will then determine who dominates the city council in general, Democrats or Republicans.
Okay, a few seconds left on this segment. What happens now? We mentioned it looks like they're still going to have 600 residences there, but they're literally back to the drawing board.
Right. They agreed to cut the amount of traffic in half associated with that. We don't know yet what they're going to do to achieve that, so they have to go back to the drawing board and kind of figure that out. They say that they'll present a new plan relatively soon to the public, but it does still have to go through the full process. So community meetings, planning commission, city council. So, it could be a year or more before we kind of come back to this approval phase.
We'll certainly be following that as we move along here. Now, before we get to our Chargers segment, I did want to say, Lori, I'm holding up for our radio listeners here, the new San Diego Union Tribune, it says on the front page of your newspaper today. The new owners from the LA Times have changed the paper back, the name of the paper back from UT San Diego. And what was the reaction in the newsroom briefly to that today?
I got the sense it was pretty gleeful. I think we for years, decades, have had this brand of San Diego Union Tribune. When it went to UT San Diego, we had to kind of rebrand ourselves. Now we're back to, I think, a very well-known brand. I think it's only upside for that. I think, and as I said, we're very happy about it.
All right, back to the future on that one. Well, the last-ditch plan to keep the Chargers in San Diego was unveiled this week. A citizens task force assembled by Mayor Kevin Faulconer came up with a financing blueprint that supposedly generates enough funds to cover the $1.1 billion cost of a new stadium. The big question, is it too little, too late? Adam Day, chair of the Mayor's Citizens Stadium Advisory Group, that's a mouthful, says the plan is workable. Here's what he had to say.
This is a good investment for the city. First and foremost, the city currently spends between $11 and $14 million per year to pay for the operations and maintenance of Qualcomm Stadium. Our recommendation has that level going down to about $7 million a year. So essentially, the city will be saving money from its general fund budget. It's also a good investment for the team because they'll be able to recoup their investment, although we've asked them to contribute slightly more than they've offered in the past. The cost of the facility has increased over 300% in the last 10 years, and so we're asking the team to share in that cost increase. But there are opportunities for them to generate additional revenue too.
All right, Lori, break down generally. What does this look like, this public and private financing of this new stadium?
Okay, and there's a little debate on what you call public and what you call private. But clearly what's public is $121 million from the city coffers, $121 million from the county, and then hoped for $225 million from a land sale on the Qualcomm site. There are also more than $100 million proposed in parking and ticket surcharges. Some argue that's public, others argue that's private, but that you get a sense of that's the split for now.
Okay, and $1.1 billion is the price tag. They've come up with revenue that goes beyond that, right? By
about $1.4 billion.
So
there's
about another $300 million.
There's some question: did they really come up with enough $1.4 billion? But yes, but there's the personal seat licenses for tickets, which would be $120 million split between the Chargers and the public. That would be part of it. Again, naming rights revenues that could accrue to the Chargers to help pay their share. There's the Chargers rent that in present day dollars is about $173 million that they would bond against. So those are other sources of revenues.
Okay, and the public part of this, no tax raise in this, which was essential. That's what the mayor, tasked this task force with.
Right.
But it does get to the point where where's this public money coming from? This 121 out of the city and the county.
Yeah, so we know that the county has some pretty healthy cash and investment reserves. That's been said to be about $1 billion. The city less so, maybe more than $300 million. But again, every dollar is really coveted by the city and the county for public services and facilities, and that is a big question mark. And so is the land sale.
And now I want to get that segues nicely. I want to ask Scott about that. They're going to sell 75 acres of the current Mission Valley site, but there's some problems there, right, with zoning.
Yeah, so they asked Adam Day at this thing, so what about the zoning? So can you really sell this land for $225 million?
Is it zoned for a stadium?
Yeah, land is only worth what you can build on it. You can have beachfront land, but if you can't build a home there, it's not worth as much. And same thing here. So they want to know, he said, yeah, we can sell it for that much, no problem. And he said, are you sure? So this is the land as is. You think you can sell it for $3 million an acre? He said, yeah. When you look at the letter that they got that said $3 million, though, the letter says no. It has to be zoned. It has to be graded. It has to be ready to build condos on. Then we'll pay you $3 million for it per acre. And so that's just a timeline problem, and that's a problem for the Chargers. Any normal corporation hoping for $500 million or more in public subsidies might be willing to wait a couple of years, but not the Chargers. We got to work really hard for them. And then, but he played a little kabuki with that point about the operations maintenance.
We're talking about Adam Day and that fight.
He said that we lose $12 million a year on the stadium from operations maintenance. That's true. He said now we're going to only spend $7 million. Well, that's $7 million separate from operations maintenance that he just wants to use to build the stadium. They want to use that to bond to build the stadium. We have not covered operations and maintenance for the new stadium, and they did not estimate both how much that would cost or provide an exact funding source for it. And so when you add that all together, that's another public subsidy to this, because right now we lose about $10 million from operations and maintenance at Qualcomm Stadium. And they'll say, well, we'll have a lot more events there. Well, it's not clear where those events did. We did a survey of all the other stadiums in the country to figure out who's doing really good on events. And there are some places doing really well on events, but not near covering a break-even level. And without a roof, we're not going to be able to have the same level of events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
I kind of ran up at the same thing when that report came out, and I was questioning Adam about the rent, and did that cover, how was that going to pay for operation maintenance? Like, that was not our job to come up with that, he said. We identified a lot of revenues. It's up to the city and county to figure out where that revenue's going to come from. And as far as as far as events, I know they had a real long laundry list of events that they think could generate revenue, but you've also got Petco Park having events too, like the Stones this weekend. So they're going to be competing against each other for these marquee events.
I mean, the key point on the rent too. The rent they're picturing would be bonded itself and invested in the construction of the stadium. Rent now, or ostensibly, would be used to pay operations maintenance. So that's where that hole comes from. There's no identified money for exactly where all that money for operations maintenance would come from. But this may all be moot. I mean, the Chargers...
Well, yeah, that's my next question.
Yeah.
Let's get to the Spanos family on this. Of course, they've owned long-time owners of the Chargers. They'd be responsible for $300 million under this plan. What's their feeling about that, or about this whole plan in general?
Look, they're just not into this plan. They're not into this framework. They're clearly not in... They're throwing shade on everything, publicly and privately. I mean, they're just not into this framework. A lot of people say, well, maybe they're just trying to push for a better deal. Well, I think that the contours of this amount of public and private investment might be something they'd be willing to work with. But I just don't think they're into this entire framework. I think they want to move their operations to LA. Now, they're the Chargers, so they might fail at that. But I think that's their goal. Now, I think that that might not work out, and they may get more time here. But if they get more time here, I think they'll push for an entirely different framework outside of Mission Valley.
And from the perspective of a kind of glass half full Chargers fan perspective, I think part of the reason that you're not hearing much from Fabiani and the Chargers is...
Mark Fabiani being their spokesman.
The spokesman for the Chargers, is that they're moving, we hope, into negotiations, and it's probably not in their best interest to start talking a lot, and you're seeing that the case with the city and the county. So, and there are downsides to LA. You have to reestablish your fan base. I know they say they get 25% of their fans from the LA Orange County area, but you have to rebuild your business. Will you be competing, if you're sharing it with the Raiders, you're competing with that fan base? And I mean, there are still downsides to LA, and so there's a part of me that wonders, I can't tell how into or not into the plan, but obviously they're moving forward very much with Carson.
Well, before I ask about Carson and some of the situations with that site, wasn't the timing curious this week when the Chargers announced they'd hired well-known a former 49ers executive Carmen Policy to shepherd that deal? This was kind of the only public response, wasn't it? Maybe a single finger salute to this whole task force plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, they could have just said, yeah, this is a really interesting framework. We're going to consider it. They said, well, we'll look at it. And then when you ask Spanos 2 days later, the president of the company, if he'd seen this, after they had given a briefing to the owners of the other teams about what the situation was in San Diego, and they asked him, did you read this plan? He's like, no, I didn't see it.
How's that make you feel, Charger fan?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's just a slap. He doesn't care.
Well, and even our columns today, he had a column, an open letter to Dean Spanos, and called him out on that. Like, come on, you still haven't read the plan. So no, I know that doesn't look good. And then the hire. When I talked to some outside experts about the hiring of Carmen Policy, they said, well, maybe they would also kind of help them shepherd he would help them shepherd a plan in San Diego, but Policy has clearly said, no, I'm doing this for Carson, it's not for San Diego.
It's become increasingly clear that the NFL can force the Chargers or force this whole process in LA to slow down, and maybe we have another year to work on something. But the way that the deadlines have been put down from the NFL, that you can't have a public vote in 2016, that you can't wait for development in this rezoning of this land. Again, the rezoning of the land shouldn't be that big a deal. We can do that, but it's going to take a year or two to do. Yeah. And that's not enough time for them. I'm sorry, $500 million, you got to wait 2 years, and that's not enough time, or that's, you need to get that done sooner. They're not into it. They're not into it.
What about the Carson site itself? Does it have hurdles and problems?
Absolutely, but I don't think it has any more hurdles than what we face in Mission Valley. And I think that that's what they're thinking, is that they're going to go for that. And if it doesn't work out, well, maybe San Diego can throw them something. But it's just I think we need to face that. And that's not me being like cynical or mean. I think that's just the problem that we should address head on.
And I don't know, how much the family weighs that sort of incalculable value of being the hometown team, staying put. I mean, we know, we get a sense, we've heard from Dean Spanos that he would like to stay in San Diego, all things being equal, but they're a business operation, and they have to go where they're going to make money. And they obviously could make a lot more money in the LA market, where you have big corporations and more well-heeled fans to pay.
You touched on that seat licensing proposal, and that's done very well in places like San Francisco. What about here? You got $100 million, isn't that what they're trying to raise through that? You're going to get people to buy seat licenses. That's just the right to buy a ticket, right?
Yeah, it's a license to pay more money for something. They can probably do some level of that, and I think that's a pretty good estimate. Look, this plan is very honest. It's very comprehensive, and it's an elegant sort of puzzle that they've put together. But that point in particular, I think, is well established. That's how much they'll be able to get. The Chargers just aren't into that timeline. They want to get in it, the LA done, and I think that they're just going to kind of throw shade on this in the meantime.
Right.
And we haven't even talked about a ballot measure.
That's what was my next question. You don't really have to have a vote here, because we're not raising taxes. But the mayor has been rather insistent that he's going to put this before the public.
And
kind of a
again,
yes or no.
Yeah, to Scott's point, time. Could they really get a ballot measure in November here? And, this year, how quickly could they do it? The NFL's rep, Eric Grubman, has talked about, wanting to wrap this up by early next year. So that's a big obstacle.
You can't pick you can't have a ballot measure. The city can't commit to an area, a site for this, without doing an environmental review. And so how that ballot would actually look is really odd. And they say that a ballot measure is not required. Well, it actually is for the county. The county has a policy in place that you have to have a vote if the county is going to put any money into a stadium. And then I asked Adam Day about it. He's like, but they can change that rule. It's like saying, well, the speed limit's 65, but they can change that. But that's the way it is right now. And so there is going to be a vote. When that can possibly be. And what if it's a countywide vote, but the city voters vote against it, but the county voters outweigh them? How does that go down? Because as a city voter, I have to pay quite a bit more for this stadium than the county does. And so somebody in Ramona has a much better deal. So it's more in their interest to vote for it. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion.
Any sense of, Megan, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of the timeline, the environmental review, that could very well take a really long time. We just saw with One Paseo, that took 6 years. Yeah. And we're talking about Mission Valley, and right down the road is the Savita development. Right. And everybody recognizes that traffic is going to be absurd in that area. Yeah. And so, can these lots that they're selling, would they be viable as for condo developments and that sort of thing? And those
rezone is no slam dunk. Yeah,
no, it's already one of the business areas in the region.
Yeah, as you pointed out, there's the NIMBY issue. The city can really push to expedite this, but you still got that NIMBY issue.
Well, what might it cost to attend a game? Megan, if you chose to go to a football game, I don't know that you do. Are we going to see prices triple? We kind of saw that with Petco Park with the Padres.
It'll definitely be more. And one of the things the Chargers are going to be frustrated with is that the city wants to put a surcharge on tickets, but then the Chargers will say, well, that just limits how much we can charge for tickets. And so these are the kind of things they can negotiate out. But again, the way they're throwing shade on every part, I don't think really indicates that they're interested in this type of puzzle.
Getting back to that vote for a moment, any polls or any sense of taking the temperature here? Would a vote pass, yes or no? Chargers stay, Chargers go, public money?
Yeah,
I think we're going to be having a poll soon, but I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, we know that 2/3 would never make it. Maybe if it doesn't look like it's to the voter that it's money out of their pocket, we could get maybe a 51% vote. But I think that's still. It's still in question, and again, you could say that city-county split, and how does that look if city voters don't go for it? It's a big risk.
And also, the Chargers need to get on board. They would need to start really very quickly, because you might think of this as a primary election, right? These are two sides going at it, and then maybe they'll win, and then they'll go for the general election, which will be between taxpayers and the teams, and they'll have to work and convince them to get more than 50%. But that primary election is still not settled.
Before we got a little bit of time left on this, what about the Aztecs? What's San Diego State's reaction? They're going to have to pay a lot more money. And what happens to the Aztecs if this stadium goes away? If the Chargers go, where do the Aztecs play?
Yeah, so this plan does envision, like $20 million from the Aztecs, which would be a rent every year. They don't pay hardly anything in rent right now. I don't know. I've heard Petco Park for them to play at if Qualcomm's no longer viable, or maybe they build their own small stadium either on this Qualcomm area or on campus somehow.
All right, quick one round of the table here. The Chargers stay or do they go? Ultimately, what happens? She's going to punt.
Yeah.
I think the hometown spirit will weigh out. They'll stay.
I think there's a 20% chance they stay, only because they might fail in their attempt to go to LA.
All right, very good. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Megan Burks of KPBS News, Scott Lewis, a voice of San Diego, and Lori Weisberg of the newly renamed San Diego Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.